What up guys, Otterpop here, and welcome to another review for another episode of Dan Vs. This is going to be a review specifically for Dan Vs. Season 1, Episode 3, Dan vs. the Ninja. Now, real quick, I want to apologize for a couple of things. First off, I want to apologize for the echoiness that was in the first two reviews. I didn't even know that they were there until after I recorded them, but I couldn't really re-record them. I was on a bit of a time crunch, so unfortunate. But I also want to apologize because this is the third episode, but it was technically one of 4 episodes that I reacted to out of order. Again, it's supposed to be Wolfman, New Mexico, Ninja, the Dentist, but I reacted to it, New Mexico, Wolfman, Dentist, Ninja. So this is technically supposed to be the third episode, not Dentist. Luckily, I don't think it was as big of a deal that I reacted to this and Dentist out of order compared to Wolfman in New Mexico. I mean, I still kind of wish I would have reacted to them in order. I would have been a little more patient. I would have reacted to them in order. Unfortunately, I did not, but I at least think for Ninja and Dentist, it wasn't quite as big of a deal, so there is that. But now onto a very quick recap of the episode. When a ninja decides to destroy Dan's milk and steal his cookies, he's on a revenge mission. I mean, shocker. This is Dan we're talking about. But it turns out that Elise may actually be his best chance at survival. Now, there were a whole bunch of little things that I noticed during the episode and after a rewatch. The first thing I noticed, which was even said by Dan before the title card even appeared, was that Dan's lactose intolerance was introduced. Because he mentioned something about lactose-free milk, and I'm like, oh, he's lactose intolerant. Okay, interesting. And then, as I called out in a couple of previous episodes, I was really questioning Dan's intelligence a few times throughout this episode, and again, throughout the first 2 episodes even. But, like, someone asked him at the beginning of the episode before the title card appears, drinking problem much? And he yells at them for not using a verb, and I'm like, I didn't even realize that you could recognize that fact, Dan, but also, okay, like, he respects proper grammar? Is that what's happening? I mean, I know I usually do, but I'm also a writer, so there's a little bit of an explanation for that. And then later on in the episode, Dan claims that he himself is very suave and debonair and sophisticated, and I'm like, that's a lot of impressive vocabulary for you to know, because it seems like he's not just using the words, I just get a gut feeling that he knows what they mean, but he doesn't seem like the kind of character who would know that kind of stuff. His knowledge base is just incredibly random. I had figured that out, by the time I'd watched this episode. Like, this was the 4th episode I'd watched, but it was pretty apparent across all 4 episodes that he seemed to know quite a bit, and yet was still an idiot with something, so I'm just like, which is it? Should have been a slight clue in as to the fact that this was actually the 3rd episode, because the first episode, Wolfman, focused on introducing us to Dan and Chris and the sort of relationship that they have. The second episode, New Mexico, introduced us to Elise as well, and kind of the interactions that she had with both Chris and Dan, but still kind of showing what all 3 of them together were like. This 3rd episode was definitely more of an Elise-centric episode, which kind of makes a little bit of sense. I mean, based on the New Mexico episode, I already had expected her to, be like, oh, I guess she's a secret agent, government type individual. But apparently was also a ninja and lived in Japan for a little bit, which completely surprised me. I feel like it shouldn't have, but it absolutely did. Again, I was expecting secret agent type stuff, not ninja stuff. It was actually an interesting thing to find out, however, that the characters of Chris and Dan were based off of the in-real-life counterparts of the creators of the show, Dan Mandel and Chris Pearson. Again, it's fascinating stuff. I honestly wouldn't have even guessed that, somebody would have created a show around, well, no, I feel like it makes sense that somebody would have created a show around that kind of thing at some point, but the fact of the matter is that not only are Dan and Chris real, but Elise is real as well. She is actually Chris's wife, and she's actually Japanese, so my guess is that Chris and Dan probably took that little aspect and just kind of threw it into the show, threw it into Elise's character, and was like, she's not Japanese, but she was in Japan for a little bit, and she kind of became a ninja as a result. I mean, from what I understand, the real Elise isn't like, a super badass or secret agent or anything like that, but she's still Japanese, so I guess it kind of counts enough? I don't know. Given that she was in Japan for a while and is a ninja, that also means that she can understand a little bit of Japanese. At one point later on in the episode, there's a note that's left on Chris and Elise's door that, if I'm recalling correctly, it was a note in Japanese that said, Shinobi no mono wa kanasukatsu, which is like a legitimate Japanese. I am almost positive that that is legitimate Japanese, because I know the words to a lot of Japanese songs. I'm familiar with what some Japanese words are, but I'm a lot more familiar with what they sound like, so that sounded like legitimate Japanese that they decided to throw into the episode, so I thought that that was actually a pretty cool Easter egg, so cool. Now, even though that I mentioned that this was sort of an Elise-centric episode, that still doesn't mean that the relationship between her and Chris and her and Dan wasn't still a little bit on display here, especially the relationship between Dan and Elise, like the two of them together. There was an interesting display that was happening here. Like, they agreed with each other a lot, and they seemed on fairly friendly terms over the entire course of the episode. I mean, at the time, I was wondering what kinds of similarities their personalities might have, but it was interesting to see them mixed together like this. I made some similar comments about Chris and Dan's relationship on the first episode, but this was Dan and Elise's relationship, which is completely and fundamentally different. So it was interesting to see it mix. I mean, there was a little bit of it present in New Mexico as well, but it was a lot more prevalent in this episode, and it was interesting, surprising, and weird to see all at the same time. Later on in the episode, I even confessed my concern for the fact that the two of them in any agreement might be a little bit of a terrifying combo, since both seem to be a little bit unhinged, but in very different ways. So just seeing the two of them together like this, and agreeing so much and working together so much, I don't know, it made me a little nervous. Because, I mean, Dan can get a little bit unhinged just because he's a man-child who gets angry at everything and just lets his emotions take over pretty much all the time, really. And Elise, like, she could be unhinged, but that could be a little bit related to, like, her secret life and might get too caught up with her job or jobs, whatever secret government agent ninja nonsense. But once again, a Elise-centric episode also took some turns I was expecting, but was also a little bit surprised about. And the reason that I say that is because, like, she tells the story of what I believe they were called the Kashugi clan in impressive detail. She tells the story of their clan, their history, and, you know, some current facts about them in very impressive detail. But as soon as she might start talking about her own life, she's just like, I'm not going to be telling you that. Like, either that could be something saved for a future episode, or that's just something that we're never really going to fully know about. Like, it could go either way, honestly. But it makes sense that nothing like that would be said, because this was only the third episode of the show. They're not just about to, you know, pull out of all the aces out of their sleeves and just throw the audience with information. That just wouldn't make a lot of sense. So it kind of makes sense, I guess, that her character is just hesitant to say anything. Or maybe she's not telling them for their own safety, which, I mean, if she's doing secret government agent stuff, that would kind of make sense. I'm sorry if I'm saying secret agent and government, or all three of those words together, like, multiple times, but I'm trying to think of a better term to call her, but I'm coming up blank. But I mean, it would kind of make a little bit of sense that she would at least want to keep Chris safe, because he doesn't really seem like the type who would be able to, you know, say, fend off another secret agent, or even the worst ninja. I don't even think he could put up a good fight against the worst ninja in the world. He just doesn't seem like the type. He doesn't seem all that strong or durable or fast, and yeah, I think he's just a little bit clumsy. I don't know. I mean, he's also a bit lazy. There's that as well. And speaking of Chris, there was a little bit of interesting stuff that was happening with Chris and Elise's relationship. Obviously, we'd seen a few other relatively normal things happen between her and Chris over the previous two episodes, but this one was a little bit different because, you know, Elise seems to be fine with using Chris as bait for the ninja instead of Dan, since the ninja seems to be after Dan now, and Elise suggests using, or no, was it Dan who suggested using Chris as bait? But either way, Elise seems to be fine with him being bait and potentially getting poisoned. And probably not die. And she sweet talks him basically into, you know, going along with the plan. Like, yeah, don't worry, you probably won't die. Everything will be okay. And he just goes with it. He just goes with it. It really makes me question the fundamentals of their relationship. And continues the obvious trend of Chris being a little bit of a doormat and a pushover, although at this point I was kind of starting to feel a little bad for him. I mean, just a little. Not a lot, but just a little. And of course they were using Chris as bait for, you know, getting poisoned by the ninja, and guess what? It works! And he gets poisoned! Chris gets poisoned, and he's on some sort of hallucinogenic acid poison trip or something like that, and he starts saying weird things, he starts seeing weird things, and he's just talking nonsense. Especially with, I think he mentioned something about, like, you know, monkeys or flying monkeys, and I'm like, I just immediately thought of Wizard of Oz, but as I'm watching everything through his point of view, for some reason, all I kept thinking of was Pink Elephants on Parade from Dumbo. I don't even know why, but for some reason, it was just a trippy, colorful sequence that we saw through his eyes from time to time, and that was the only thing that came to my mind. I don't know why. My thoughts on the fundamentals of Chris and Elise's relationship is still in question. I still wonder about them. I still wonder, like, you know, how they ended up together, why they ended up together, and why they're still together even after all this like, I don't even know how long they've been married. But they're still together despite all the antics that especially Chris has to make Elise put up with, at least when it comes to Dan. And speaking of Dan, he still continues to surprise me. I've already mentioned multiple times in this review and the previous two about his intelligence, because he seems to know some things but doesn't. Like, even sort of in the middle of the episode, Dan seems to know the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, kinda, sorta, because Elise is carrying a sword on her. And, you know, she says she can carry a sword if she wants, and, you know, Dan agrees with it, simply by saying Second Amendment, and I'm like, technically that's not how that rule applies, but I see where you're coming from, but you remember this and know this how, and you're using it in this application? Okay. And I was also questioning him a little bit when Elise was going after the ninja, and then Dan takes the lid of a trash can and just tosses it right at the ninja, basically hitting the ninja, like, right in the abdomen, and I'm just like, that's some serious wicked aim. If I tried doing that exact same thing, I would miss 98% of the time, probably. Given the events of the Wolfman, where he actually took an old bow and fired a silver-tipped arrow with dead accuracy, the fact that he was able to take, like, an unbalanced, unweighted trash can lid and toss it at the ninja with basically perfectly, it made me wonder if he actually has some surprisingly good, like, throwing skills as well as depth perception. I mean, I certainly know that I don't. I can't really catch or throw anything for any reason. I'm just really bad at it. Even when I accidentally manage to catch or throw even when I accidentally manage to, like, you know, catch something, especially one-handed, my sister's around, she'll just look at me like, what? What did you just do? It's honestly a shocking thing. Like, I don't know. Maybe Dan just has some surprisingly good skills, and yet he still seems not very intelligent and angry and clumsy sometimes. So, why? What is happening? But still, over the course of the episode, there were plenty of characters to question, there were plenty of relationships and personalities to question, even of the ninja himself. Like, it turns out the ninja was the last of the Koshugi clan, or whatever it was, and, you know, the Koshugi clan made an oath never to bake cookies or sweets or whatever ever again, and, you know, Dan and Elise end up giving him a second chance. I honestly have no idea why. It doesn't seem like Dan's personality type especially, but kind of not Elise's either, given her history with Japan and the Koshugi clan. But something that I didn't voice my opinion on it, but I remember something that I was thinking about, like, right after I finished the episode was, wait a second, if Ninja Dave, and that is his name apparently, if Ninja Dave took an oath never to make cookies again, he made cookies at the very end of the episode, and he was apparently so good he opened up his own cookie shop. If he made an oath never to make cookies again, how the heck was he so good at making cookies? Good enough to open up a shop and potentially have some decent business? How is that possible? And then just kind of look at me trying to out-logic frickin' cartoon logic. Like, I shouldn't do that, but I do with just about every single cartoon I come across. Unless there's supernatural aspects that I can just, you know, explain away by, you know, supernatural reasons. Heck, I do the same thing with some of my own stories from time to time. So it was an Elise-centric episode, especially with a bit of a focus on her character, a little bit of her history, and kind of her relationship with, I feel like especially Dan and a little bit of Chris. This episode was also a little bit of a parody of Eastern action films, which I haven't really seen a lot of, but based on rewatch and after rewatching some scenes, I'm like, okay, yeah, I could see how this was probably parodying that. But the biggest thing that this episode had to have done for me, and again, by this time I'd reacted to 4 episodes, not 3. So by the end of this episode, my fascination with these 3 characters was basically solidified. And not just these characters, but even the relationships between them. How different they were from one another and how they worked together as well as they did, whether it was just 2 of them or, you know, all 3 of them. But my fascination with the characters, with their personalities and the relationships that they shared with one another, my fascination and interest in all of that was absolutely solidified by the end of watching the first 4 episodes. And again, I had already watched Dentist before Ninja at this point, but I'm pretty sure it would have happened even if I'm pretty sure the same thing would have happened even if I had watched it in order. Whether any weirdness would get pushed aside or whether any questions would get answered, it didn't matter because I would just need to keep reacting onto this show, like, at this point. Again, it's even in just 4 episodes, these characters just fascinated me to no end. Like, I was absolutely curious. I absolutely wanted to see more from these characters. And at this point, I will. I still have plenty more to go. There are still plenty of room for potential, you know, questions to be answered, so guess it's just time to watch the rest of it. It's gonna be a lot, but you know what? I can do it. I believe in myself. Believe in myself. But anyways, that is going to be the end of this review for this particular reaction. Oh crap, I just realized I totally forgot to mention that the link to the reaction is going to be down in the description below. Did I do that with the first 2 reviews? Oh, fuck me. Well, I guess you guys would probably know that at this point. You guys watch my South Park videos. Or at least some of you might not, but for those of you who aren't familiar with my video format, yes, the links to the actual reactions are going to be down in the description below. Okay, now I need to remember to say that for the reviews. I don't know how I've forgotten that of all things. But I hope you found the reaction as well as the review enjoyable or informative or entertaining, or maybe you just found it ridiculous. Who knows? I still made it anyways. So thank you all for watching, and as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters.